Everybody. I am Todd Goldberg. I am the director of the MFA program at UCR Palm Desert, and I am pleased to be joined here tonight by my good dear friend, J.R. Angelella. I know him as Ross, so I'm going to call him Ross. Let me tell you a little bit about Ross. He is the author of the irreverent and twisted coming-of-age novel, Zombie. His award-winning short fiction has appeared in Hunger Mountain Literary Review, Southwester Fifth Wednesday, the Coachella Review, which is the literary magazine of this very program. His screenplay, Nemesis, is a finalist for the Best Short Screenplay in the Florence Film Awards, the Houston Comedy Festival, the Portland Comedy Festival, Austin After Dark Film Festival. Basically, he's got a screenplay right now that's getting awards all over the country. He holds an MFA in Creative Writing and Literature from Bennington College, which is where we met. We were in grad school together, so this is not just entertainment for you, it's we get to see each other as well. He is a professor of both English and screenwriting at the University of Maryland and at Towson University. He is married to the wonderful Kate. He has a son named Gino. He is moving in how many days, Ross?
Oh, gosh. Wait, we get to Key Saturday. We're moving on the 30th officially.
He is moving into a new home in a couple of days, but he is here tonight to talk to you guys about the great television show, Bosch. So, for those of you who live in the Coachella Valley, you know that typically in the summertime we do a film series called Litflix. And for Litflix, we watch films that have been adapted from books, whether they be fiction or nonfiction. Last year, I think we did all Jane Austen books, and that's when I became very aware of the dating habits of the 18th century, and I've used that, you know, frequently in my life during the vast global pandemic. But, you know, for this turn of the series, since we're all stuck at home, and I imagine most of us are spending a lot of time with the streaming services, I thought it would be cool this summer to look at a couple different TV shows that have been adapted from popular books. So we're starting off with Bosch. After Bosch, we're going to do Little Fires Everywhere, which is based on the Celeste Ng book. And was a limited series that was on earlier this year. And then after that, we're going to do Watchmen, which is based on the comic book and also based on the movie, but not actually based on either of those things, which will be a very cool discussion to have. Bosch, as I suppose many of you know, because I presume a lot of you have seen the show before, is based on the books of Michael Connelly, which we're going to get to in just a sec. So we're going to talk, Ross and I, for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to your questions. We'll answer all your questions that you have for as long as you want to talk about it, because we don't have anywhere we need to go. And Instacart hasn't arrived yet, so we don't have any food in my house. So, Ross, when did you start watching the show?
So I saw the pilot years ago when Amazon first dropped it. And I think you and I were talking about this. Like, they did a weird thing where they pitted 5 shows against each other, pilots. And so I saw the pilot then and I really liked it. And then I knew that it was greenlit at some point, and I never really had an interest in seeing it or had time with so much content out there. But it wasn't until the pandemic and life grinding to a halt that my wife and I decided, like, what's a new show, and we decided to give Bosch a shot, and we burned through it. And then season 6 dropped whenever that did. What was it, April?
Yeah, April 17th. So you're on the East Coast, so you were in the second month of the pandemic. We were still in that part of it where we thought we were ever going to get out. So we were 30 days in.
Yeah. And what's exciting about this conversation having with you is essentially when I started watching Bosch, you and I text each other quite a bit, and we were having the conversation we're probably about to have over text message,
right,
about the show. And so when you decided to do it, it was like a no-brainer for us to jump on a Zoom and have this talk.
Well, so the show itself debuted in 2014. The pilot showed up in 2013, as you talked about. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the way Amazon used to do stuff, it was this really weird thing that they would do where they would film like half a dozen or maybe more than that, maybe like a dozen pilots. And they'd throw all the pilots up onto Amazon, and viewers got to vote on what they liked the best. And then through whatever dealings Amazon did with the voting and then with their own interior decision-making, that's how they chose what was going to become a series. It was a very democratic way to run a television network, and a really terrible way to run a television
Yeah.
network. And so Bosch was eventually picked up to air in 2014. But let me go back and give you a little bit of the backstory about how the Bosch books actually ended up on TV, because it's an odd thing. So for those of you who are big Michael Connelly fans, you've probably been wondering, why haven't there been a ton of Bosch movies or a previous Bosch TV show? These books have been published since the early 1990s. Michael Connelly is the biggest selling crime writer in America who's still alive, or who isn't James Patterson writing under 50 different names. And there's only been a few movies that have ever been made from Michael Connelly projects. One of them was The Lincoln Lawyer, which came out with Matthew McConaughey in 2005, and which is currently being developed for a TV show. And we'll talk about that at some point too. And then there was the Clint Eastwood movie that was made of the FBI agent books that Michael Connelly wrote, the Terry McCaleb books. Both of those, the Matthew McConaughey movie was a hit. The Clint Eastwood movie was not. Bloodwork is what it was called. Paramount bought the rights to the Michael Connelly novels, his first two novels, in 1992. For the next 15 years, they didn't make anything. And for those 15 years, Michael Connelly became the biggest crime writer in America today, sold millions and millions and millions of books. But Paramount wouldn't move. They wouldn't make anything, or they never greenlit anything that was made. So in 2007, Michael Connelly decided apparently that he'd had enough and attempted to buy his rights back, because there was a reversion in his contract that after 15 years, he could buy the rights back. But in order to get an accurate amount of money that he'd have to pay, he had to sue Paramount to actually get their records of what they'd paid other screenwriters and people in development and all of that, the bill that comes due on all of these projects. So for instance, so this has happened to me in the past, when Hollywood options a book of yours and they don't make it, it goes into what's called turnaround. And in turnaround, someone else can pick up the book and buy it, but they have to pay the existing cost that the other studio had if it's within a certain period of time. Sometimes that's a little bit of money, $10,000 or something. Sometimes it's a lot of money. In the case of the Michael Connelly books, lots and lots of screenwriters had worked on it. There'd been lots of option money that had been sent out back and forth. Paramount had never put the stuff into turnaround. They still had the rights, but it was just at this point that Connelly was able to try to buy them. So he sued Paramount Pictures, and right before the case was to go to trial, they settled out of court, and Michael Connelly paid Paramount $3 million to get his books back, which seems to me, Ross, to be the sort of thing that would make me want to throw myself off of a building.
Man, that's a flex. That is such a major flex to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he's doing fine. Like he didn't pay the $3 million and then was like, ah, shit, I can't make my rent. They're gonna repo my Nissan Sentra. Like that didn't happen. So he was doing fine, but he also must have known that the opportunities existed for him out there somewhere else. And in fact, they did, because Amazon very quickly got into business with Michael Connelly, and they put this into production. So the first season ran in 2014. The sixth season started this April 17th. There's one more season that's coming, which will probably air at some point after they start filming again, which could be any time. We don't know. I'm hoping soon, because I love the show and I want to see it soon. That's my only reason why I hope it's soon. So the 6 seasons, though, of this show, it's never won any Emmys. It's never been talked about like Game of Thrones or anything.
Right. And it's their most popular show, I hear.
It's their most popular show. And for me, it's just like, it's popcorn, man. If it's 11 o'clock at night, I'm watching Bosch, so I love it for that. What's the thing that draws you to it, or has drawn you to it during the last 3 months when you've been watching it?
Yeah, for me, it's never the main plot. It's never the mystery. It's never the murder. It's never anything like that. It's all the little character stories that hinge off of that. because that's the stuff, like if you were to watch that show on any other network, on any other streaming service, and they just made a niche genre show, it wouldn't have those stories.
Right.
You know, you wouldn't have those moments, those scenes that go on 30 seconds, 45 seconds longer than they should, because somebody stopped and looked at something, or and had a throwaway line, or you know, broke their line in a certain way. Like there's all these little moments that is maybe to writing, maybe to acting, maybe to direction, maybe to all of it. But that's what I keep coming back to.
But when you look at it as an adaptation, I mean, they do really unusual things. So this season of Bosch is based on 2 books. It's based on The Overlook, which came out in 2006. And it's also based on Dark Sacred Night, which came out just a few years ago. And then there's entire plot points that are completely made up by the writing staff of the show. And this is what they've done throughout the history of the show. So just to go back real quick, season 1 of Bosch was based on 3 different books. The Concrete Blonde, which was Connolly's 3rd Bosch book. City of Bones, which was Connolly's 8th Bosch book, and Echo Park, which was his 12th book. And then it also weaved in B stories from throughout different parts of the entire canon. And then, of course, the writers just made stuff up. Season 2 was based on The Last Coyote and Trunk Music, which were books 4 and 5. Season 3 was crazy. It was based on The Black Echo, which was Connolly's 1st book, A Darkness More Than Night, which was his 7th book, and then there is a murder, and that murder stands alone, and it's pulled from an entirely different book, which is The Drop. And then it goes on like this in a bunch of the other shows. So at the top of the show, when it says based on the books of Michael Connolly, they're really being accurate about this because they are pulling from everywhere. They're not just adapting one single thing. They're picking and choosing. And I think part of that is because Connolly is the executive producer, so
sure,
he can do whatever he wants. But for you, Ross, like if you're looking at an adaptation, would you prefer to have 30,000 pages to deal with to make a TV show, or just 300?
300 if it's just me, but if I would be willing to bet that Connolly is saying, here's what I think from my canon that would make a good season, because when you're adapting something, your hands are tied. You're limited in what you can do on the page, just from a writing component, a writing perspective. You're looking at a novel, you've got all 5 senses, you've got you could have 30 pages of a character just deep in a memory, or deep in thought. You can't use any of that on screen, because if you're going to adapt it, it's got to be visual. The information is only communicated visually and audibly. So when you're adapting, you're reducing everything down. Rick Rubin, I just listened to a podcast with Rick Rubin and Andre 3000 from Outkast, and Rick Rubin says, I'm not a producer, I'm a reducer. And I really like that as a concept, because I think that's very much what you're doing. And everyone who's listening, who's gone to the movies or watched a television show of their favorite book, what's the first thing you say when someone asks how it was? You say, the book was better. Well, of course you're going to say that, because there's so much more in the book that would never make it to the screen. There's maybe like a handful of movies that are better than the book, but it's, I think we were talking about this, a novel, when you're working on a novel, when you're writing a novel, you're spending, 18 months, a year, years building a car that goes fast and is safe and it passes all inspection. And then you finish it, and then somebody comes and says, all right, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of money, and I'd like you to turn it into a boat. And now you have to take this thing and adapt it and have it move, but move differently and be a completely different beast. And so in terms of Bosch, and I saw the Amazon has like a 4-minute feature in season 6, and Connolly talks about how it's a helix or a double helix of stories from different books. The only person that's going to be able to know that stuff super well is him.
Yeah, and I think having the man who's, or in the case of Little Fires Everywhere, when we talk about that, the woman who has the story in their head, who knows the motivation of the cab driver who's driving by in a given scene, makes a really big difference in how you can shove things in from different places. Because I think sometimes too, the screenwriter feels like, well, I can only work within these 300 pages. I can't go out. And part of this is about cost. So
Sure.
for the listeners and the viewers, typically, if a studio options a book and wants to adapt it into a TV series, they only own that one book. And if they want to take something from another book, it's another huge sum of money. But I suspect with the deal that they have with Connolly for Bosch, because of the way that they're doing it, it's impossible that there's a separate fee for every single book,
Sure.
because every episode would cost $5 million, and that's obviously not the case. So they have this huge canon to steal from, and then they have the man who created it anyway, and so he is giving approval for himself to say, well, I'm going to use this murder from book 5 and this murder from book 9 because it's me regardless. It's a really unique point of view that not a lot of TV shows based on books get to have. And the one sort of comp that I can think of off the top of my head is Justified. For those of you out there that remember that show that was on FX, it was actually based on an Elmore Leonard short story. And then Elmore Leonard, when Justified came out, wrote a bunch of novels with the same character in it because he was like, well, I could get paid for this. Yeah. Because Elmore Leonard was not a dumb guy. But they ended up, having Elmore Leonard be a consultant on the show too. And I think it was sort of a similar deal. Something that is interesting for me is the way that they also take from the books the city of Los Angeles. And I suspect a lot of people watching that live in Southern California, part of the great joy of watching Bosch, and particularly this season when we're all stuck at home, was and is being on the streets of LA, but not just like the streets you're in the weird dark parts of Koreatown, or you're in Chatsworth, or you're in Los Feliz, or you're up at the Overlook, all these different places. It's really I know this is a bit of a cliche, but it's really a love letter to Los Angeles. And so for me, like when I was watching it in April and feeling like, oh my God, I'm never gonna get to leave my house, because that turns out to be true. It was cool, like to be able to drive by Pink's in an episode of Bosch. For you, is it a similar thing, like to see the city, or does it just feel like a backlot to you?
It is similar, but in a different way. So I'm an East Coaster, and I've been in LA for hours in my life, just passing through, never there for long stays. Actually, I got laid over there once, and I told you where the airport put me up, and you said, don't leave your room. Just stay in your room, eat vending machine food. And I did. Yeah. So for me, my LA is through my screen, right? It's what I see in movies, in television. And again, when you and I were talking about Bosch these last few months, what dawned on me was there was a realness to it. Nothing seemed like they were trying to sell me LA. Right. Nothing seemed like they were trying to, hard convince me. And everything seemed like lived in and like well worn. And I couldn't put my finger on exactly what that was. And then the last season we did the rewatch of season 6, and I had to watch a lot of it on my computer under headphones. And the experience of watching it and listening to it under headphones was crazy. If you get a chance, watch an episode of Bosch in headphones. The sound design is incredible. And then I was paying attention to lighting, and it was a really subtle but specific design to the look of it. And I in some research found out that there were no sets used. Everything was, if they were going to be a scene in a restaurant, they chose a real restaurant. If it was going to be a scene in a hotel, it was going to be a real hotel. They didn't fake anything to be something else because they wanted that realness to come across. And so while I believe myself to be a smart person, I did not come up with that. Eventually I found out that was the motivation behind it, was they chose real locations, which would then explain the look of it.
The only standing set that they ever use is the bullpen.
Sure, and that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing about the sound design playing a big role, because I so often watched it at midnight in bed with a Cocker Spaniel across my chest.
It's a totally different experience.
And my sleeping wife next to me, and like there's a shootout or whatever. I'm like, oh God, I gotta adjust that. So I'll do it with my good surround sound headphones. So this season, season 6, is a little different than previous seasons, because the big crime is actually sort of more of, in my mind, I think of it as being more of like a network TV crime than a Bosch crime. So typically in the previous seasons, there's a murder, or there's, the big crime is something personal and specific to Los Angeles or something, but it's not something that might threaten all of humanity, right? But in season 6, the setup is that a doctor is found murdered, and a radioactive substance, cesium, he's stolen it from his hospital, and it has gone missing. And the police believe these sort of malicious separatists have taken it, and that sets off the plot for the season. So, but there's this idea that, oh my God, terrorists are going to blow up Los Angeles with the cesium. And I didn't even know cesium was real, because as soon as I heard it, I was like, well, they're not going to blow up LA with this.
No, that's not a real thing.
Yeah, that's not a real thing. Like, we can be clear on that. And so it wasn't until about 45 minutes ago when I texted Ross and said, is cesium a real thing? And Ross said, yes, you moron, it is. And then I looked up and it was, but I knew that they weren't going to blow up all of LA anyway. And so it ends up being a strange sort of non-Boschian mystery. But then there's 2 other large mysteries, or actually there's 3 large mysteries that go along with it as well. There's a cold case, which is actually a remnant from season 5. There is Bosch's partner, J. Edgar, who in the books is not his partner throughout all the books. He's his partner just for a couple of the books. And that's a key difference in the series, is that J. Edgar is his partner all the way through. In the both of the books that this is adapted from, he's not his partner in those books. J. Edgar is dealing with basically Haitian assassins who might have killed his father.
Murder squads from Haiti, yeah.
Yes. Then there's the militias. There's one other. What's the other one? Are we missing one?
No, I think those are the big ones. There's a lot of other personal, like minor character personal struggles, but those are the big stories.
Yeah. So these are going on all at the same time, and when you say them out loud in front of people, it makes you sound like a crazy person. But in the scope of the show, and I think in typical cop shows, procedurals, the other 3 stories are actually pretty normal. And the one about the cesium, it's more like a CSI or NCIS plot than a typical Bosch plot. So what did you make of the overarching story of this season?
The main story?
Yeah.
The main one? I really liked the season, but I did not find that main story interesting at all in any kind of way. It really felt more like the engine that was pulling all the other stories forward and creating a counter tension to whatever J. Edgar or Bosch or LT or whatever anybody else was going up against. This was something that everyone was still affecting everyone, because it was a federal case, but it was also a murder, and then there was cesium, and it's a real thing, Todd.
It's a real thing. It's bad.
So unlike other Bosch seasons, this one, every time we got back to it, I was less interested, and only because I felt like I had seen it before. There wasn't anything terribly new about it. What was new about it was what I said earlier, that all of the other stories would not exist in an NCIS or a Blue Bloods or a Hawaii Five-0, whatever those shows are. You're going to lose all of those other really great side stories.
Yeah, and it seems to me the way that the show was written is that they recognize that as well, because they essentially solve that mystery of what happened to the cesium in episode 3. Yeah. Which leaves 7 episodes left to go on this main story. So in the book itself, in the Outlook, which this main story is based on, the plot itself only takes 12 hours. It's a very unusual Connolly book because it was actually serialized in the New York Times Magazine over the course of like 4 months or something. So it's also about 200 pages shorter than the average Connolly book. The crime itself is the same. The whodunit part of it is the same, but there's nothing else that's the same. None of the secondary stories exist inside that book itself. But the unusual thing, I think, in that cesium mystery is that, in fact, Bosch doesn't solve it. Right. So we're going to give away spoilers, folks. We're assuming that you watched the show, that you're not just here because you wanted to hear us talk, although we're very entertaining. So Bosch doesn't actually solve the crime, the initial crime of where's the cesium. What happens is a homeless man is found dead in the middle of North Hollywood, covered in radiation burns. Right. Through some amazing police work where they go to the place where he turns in his bottles for money, and they say, "Do you know where this guy lives?" And they're like, "Hey, he lives up there in a motorhome." Because I don't know about you guys, but wherever I go to turn in my refuse, they know exactly where I live. So like it's a bit of a plot contrivance, and as it's happening, as a viewer, you just have to be like, okay, well, then we're not supposed to be too worried about this, you know. And
you see what happens though when you play a big plot line like that, right? It elevates out and it becomes that big, broad detective show, right, that you just have to willingly suspend your disbelief and follow it, because it's right, not the Bosch rooted in the sadness and darkness of streetwalkers and, you know, like the downtrodden. It's a bigger thing, and, right, and yeah, but yeah, but then as it progresses, and you pointed this out earlier, that Bosch is the one that ultimately cracks the case with the woman, right, who is at the center of the murder, in his Boschian way. Like he is really connected to the female characters in the show that come across, and he can read them and tell when someone is being dishonest.
Yeah, so the character of Bosch, we should also talk a little bit about the differences. So in the books, he's a Vietnam vet. He was a tunnel rat in Vietnam in the books. Right. That's not going to work in a TV show that's set in present day. So he's been bumped up to a Gulf War vet who had been a tunnel rat. He's played by Titus Welliver, who embodies him better than any actor I could ever possibly imagine.
Oh man, that's Bosch.
Yeah, he's Bosch like Shatner's Captain Kirk. Yeah, you know, he's so good. And then J. Edgar, his partner, is played by Jamie Hector, one of many people on the show who come from The Wire. So this is the other thing about the comfort of watching Bosch. The Wire is my favorite show I've ever seen. Same Ross here. Is from Baltimore.
Favorite show ever. Hands
favorite down. Show ever. Like Ross was raised in Amsterdam and on the docks. So seeing all these people that were on The Wire in Bosch, it's not like happenstance. A bunch of the writers from The Wire are on Bosch too. So the show is run by a writer named Eric Overmyer, who was a writer-producer on The Wire and then also on Treme and Man in High Castle, Boardwalk Empire, a bunch of stuff, Homicide, just a bunch of stuff. And so when he started, he developed Bosch with Michael Connolly. And so it's only natural that he brought over a bunch of actors that he really loved working with on The Wire and on Treme and brought them onto Bosch. So basically it's like everyone who's not on that show that David Simon was doing in New York about porn. What was that called?
Oh yeah, I saw a few episodes. It was good. I don't remember
I
whatever
can't
it
remember
is.
the name of it.
I call it the David Simon porn show, but
The
that's
Deuce. The
the
Deuce.
Deuce.
The
That's it.
Deuce.
Yeah.
So everyone who's not on The Deuce that was in The Wire is in Bosch. But so Jamie Hector, who was Marlo Stanfield, is his partner, and these are great actors, but they also come with a lot of subtext from the things that you've seen them in before.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that plays a role in more than just my enjoyment. Like, it's just fun to see the dude who played Marlo Stanfield playing a cop, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they're not going to put him in a similar role because we're going to only see Marlo. I mean, every time. I mean, I tweeted this out earlier that we were having this talk, and the picture on the ad was of Jamie Hector and Titus Welliver, and people are just writing, Marlo Stanfield, because when you see him, you're like, oh, my name is my name, like that's Marlo
Right.
Stanfield. Is this famous line from The Wire. But when you watch Bosch, it's not. It's J. Edgar.
Right.
He's this, and similar to Titus, like all those tattoos, those are Titus's tattoos, and Jamie has that scar on his face, and it's it's not explained. It's not part of the story. That's part of his physical being.
Right.
It's who he is. But what did J. Edgar like? That reveals something about that character, and he dresses very nice, very well. He's very calm and collected, and to touch on the Wire thing again, I had a hard time the certain seasons getting through Bosch because of how it was paced and structured, but it's paced and structured exactly like The Wire,
right,
which is like a novel. It's slow and methodical, and it's laying out pieces of information that are leading us in the direction of telling not just one story, but like an operatic multi-narrative, and so Bosch is different in the sense that it also plays to Michael Connelly and his content and his vision of things, which is interesting, which makes it different than The Wire.
Well, and Bosch's whole philosophy is everybody counts or nobody counts. And as a way of doing police work, obviously, it's a very empathetic way of looking at the job. But as a narrative point of view, it also allows for the viewer to go say, well, if everything counts in law enforcement and also in criminal behavior, well, then we need to look at the courts, and we need to look at the press, and we need to look at the criminals, and we need to look at the DA, and we need to look at, and that's what they do. And that's very Wire-ish, to move around into all the segments of a particular crime. And I think that's what actually separates Bosch from your sort of standard procedural, is because of that novelistic view and because of that philosophy, there's an expectation that you're going to get a sort of social mirror as well from the episodes. And you really get that in season 6, because you're getting immigration issues, you're getting drug issues, you're getting terrorism, you're getting racial inequalities in the city of Los Angeles, you're getting the mayor's race, which is touching on sex and drugs and violence and police brutality. There's a huge undercurrent of police brutality, which has gone through every single season of Bosch. One of the B stories this season, the one that involves J. Edgar, is in fact about 2 crooked cops, and then their connection to these Haitian crime lords. And in order for us to explain it, we'd both have to figure out what it was about, and we don't know. No one knows. No one knows what that storyline is about, but it was fun to watch. And so I find that really compelling, and I'm sort of interested in what they do in season 7, because Connelly is really attuned to where policing is and where Hollywood is as relates to the Black Lives Matter movement, which he's obviously in support of, but how it relates to police brutality, because Bosch, and this season 2 with J. Edgar, they skirt the issue of what is and is not a righteous use of physical force. So when you're watching J. Edgar do an extramural killing, while you're at home during the middle of a pandemic and then giant social unrest, that's different than if you were watching it 2 years ago, right?
Absolutely. I mean, even in the first episode, we're poking fun at the cesium, but in the first episode, when that character who is murdered, and I can't remember his name, but he's taking the cesium out, he stops and he puts a mask on. Well, if this was last year, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
I'm watching that, in April, and I'm like, yeah, you better put that mask on. Put a second one on too while you're at. Why is no one else wearing masks? Like, it has this, and I'm
Right.
sure that was unintentional, but all of that is there. And that conversation at the end of the season between J. Edgar and Bosch about Bosch pressing him of like, you can't, I know what you did, you can't do this. It's not, this is not what that saying means, righteous killing. That's the same conversation that they had in reverse roles in season 3, I think, where J. Edgar goes to Bosch and says, listen, I know what you did. You took out bad guys. They did bad things, but that's not who we are. We can't go around, being vigilantes. So there's a to nerd out for the writers that are on right now, there's a very simple craft tenet that I learned super late in life. And maybe many of you know this already, called playing to opposites, which is if you have a character who's good at something, you throw the opposite at them or you parallel it. So if you look at season 6 and you just look for opposites, things that are directly in opposition with themselves, when you have that, you have tension, you have drama. David Mamet is famous for doing this. Aaron Sorkin is famous for doing this. Put two characters in a room and have them disagree about something, right? Being in opposition to it. And so to have Bosch and to have J. Edgar flip-flop now with this idea of killing a bad person, a Haitian warlord of some kind, we're playing to that opposites, that we're just watching characters in transition, living lives outside of their job. We're all more than just of what we do is for money, but it's still tied into the personal moral code that they have, which is really complex and rich and wonderful.
And the other interesting thing, I mean, there's lots of interesting things about the season, but the second half of the season actually ends up being about this cold case that Bosch solves. So for those of you who watched season 5, it is the cold case is the murder of Daisy Clayton, who was the daughter of the woman he got close with in the opiate farm in the Salton Sea, which is right over there. Before he threw that guy out of the plane into the Salton Sea. It's her daughter's murder, and it's actually a much more compelling crime,
absolutely,
than the cesium thing is, because it's a cold case and he has to go and he has to rebeat it. And the thing that you're talking about the opposites, he has to go. So she had been essentially a drug addict and sort of a sort of quasi streetwalker, where she and a boyfriend were running a hustle, where they would get a guy, they'd get him into a room, the boyfriend would jump out with a gun, they'd rob him, It's the sort of stuff we all did growing up.
Just kids being kids.
But everybody matters or nobody matters. And her murder was not fully investigated because they thought she was a prostitute and therefore they don't care. And so Bosch goes in and reinvestigates it. And he's interviewing people that knew this woman 15 years ago. And they're now working at mattress stores or whatever. And it's fascinating to see the evolution of scumbag to married guy. How does that happen?
Right.
And the actual way that they solve the crime is very cool. And I mean, there's a little bit of a lucky thing where this guy had a white van in 2002, and he still owns the same white murder van 15 years later. I mean, it's possible that people keep their murder vans once they get used to them, I suppose.
If it runs, it runs.
But it's a TV show, so they have to figure out some way to do it. But it's a good and compelling thing. But it gets to the emotional core of what makes Bosch an interesting character, which is in particular, no woman who is abused, no one who abuses a woman gets off around him. Whether it's today or tomorrow or the next day, he's going to find that guy. That's his code.
Yeah,
and it's actually as it relates to sort of enjoying revenge. It's a really cool bit of revenge.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about that is, so Bosch's mother was a prostitute and she was murdered, and that's an early in the seasons. That's a mystery that he investigates and solves. But there are a couple prostitutes who are murdered over the 6 seasons. And you might say, again, if this was another television show, like, oh, they're just rehashing old storylines. And what's different about this is that Bosch, on some level, doesn't want to have to continue to solve these. And early on in the season, it's like it's a hassle for him. You know, he wouldn't say it's a hassle, but it's like he's trying to do something else. He wants to focus on other things. He's trying to move forward and not constantly try and save his mother who's dead. Like
Right.
That's what he's doing. And yet it always pulls him back to that. And that to me is just more layers on layers of his character that's wonderful. It's why we keep coming back to it.
Yeah. And so by the end of the season, unfortunately though, he solves this crime, but the woman, the mother of the dead girl, kills herself. And so the last scene that we see in season 6 is Bosch at her graveside. I happen to know that the makers of Bosch thought season 6 was their last season. And so that was supposed to be the end of Bosch, was him standing over that grave with the city of Los Angeles behind him, you know, meditating on everything that had come to this thing. You solve the crime, but you lose the person, you know? And it's sort of the essence of who Bosch is, but they're going to do one more year. So, you know, it's still a great final moment. So I would argue, and we're going to turn it over to you guys for questions in just a sec here. And I see that some of you already asked some. I would argue that the season itself, so it's 10 episodes. The first 3 or 4 episodes of setup are good. The last 7 episodes are really good. The last 7 episodes, when you get out of sort of the setup of it and you start getting into the character stuff, that's when it really starts to take off, in my view.
For sure. Yeah, there's, again, I'm in bringing it back to what I was mentioning before, the little moments that there's a scene where J. Edgar and Bosch go to someone who's part of the militia to count the guns. They're looking for a specific gun, and they go in and they look, and the gun's not there, and they know it's not there.
Right.
And then they're leaving, and they're doing that walk and talk about what they're going to do next. And in mid-conversation, you see behind them 2 kids from in that house, and their father, who was just really angry and pissed off, and it was a really tense scene. You see these 2 really happy kids hop up in a window, and they're waving, and Bosch and Jaeger turn, and Bosch just waves. And then it hangs for a minute, and then he continues on. Like, that's the kind of shit that they would cut. You
Right.
don't see that. But again, it's like, even though that's a person in there that is doing bad things, and I can't prove it, but I know it, and we're at odds with each other. There's kids, and you're a human being, and that's the moral compass. That's the humanity. That's the compassion of that character that makes it difficult to be the Batman of Los Angeles, essentially.
Right. And we didn't even really mention the militia stuff. The thing that I found, and which is huge because they literally do blow up LA. They at least blow up the courthouse in episode 10 and nearly kill Bosch and Bosch's daughter, and they basically almost kill all the people that we care about, but don't. But the thing that I thought was super cool, and this is going to seem silly, is like, okay, we have all these militia guys that are living, you know, in the San Fernando Valley, which is where I went to college. But then there's a great scene where this woman, her husband, who's the head of the militia, was shot and killed. And she has just been released from some interview, and she signs her name in blood using her thumb. And they follow her to a shady bar in like Chatsworth or North Hollywood or something. And she gets a gun from her brother, and they part ways. And then you follow the brother to his job, and the brother's just working at a florist. And like I love this one little thing. It's like, oh, these are bad guys, but the bad guy still does have to get back to his job.
They have to pay bills, you know. Like it's you got a job for the wallet and a job for the soul. Like in my soul, I'm a militiaman, militiawoman. We're gonna blow up the government, but I also got to pay my rent. So
I work at the flower store,
right?
And I just love that. I mean, it's that little bit of character that that goes a long way in a crime show, and that's the difference for me between a show like Bosch and then a show like NCIS or Blue Bloods or something like that, where they are taking a novelistic approach to character, right. Where it's not plot point, because they are willing to go slow enough and really pull it all through. And this is also sort of the difference in how these things are written. And a streaming show, you're getting 10 more minutes of airtime than you are in an hour-long show.
Yeah.
Hour-long show on network TV is actually 43 minutes. An hour-long show on streaming is sometimes 70 minutes. It's however long they want it to be.
Yeah.
And so the freedom of storytelling in that, where it doesn't need to be exactly 43 minutes because you need to have the act breaks, you need to have the commercials and all that, is extraordinarily freeing, both for the writers and for the actors. And that makes a difference. And I think that's why, more and more often in this golden age of TV, and I really do believe we're in a golden age of TV, the prestige shows, as it were, you're not seeing them on ABC or CBS or NBC because of the constraints that broadcast has on things. It's a real paradigm shift, and Bosch is a very small part of it. Bosch is popcorn. Little Fires Everywhere is going to be a different experience, but Bosch has its own place in the ecosystem. All right, so I see we got some questions. Nancy, our events manager, where are you, Nancy? Hi, Nancy. You're muted, Nancy.
Okay. Hi.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello.
Nancy has been going through the questions. She is going to fire them at us in rapid succession. I'm going to have a sip of water as well. What do we got?
So Linda asked, I agree that Michael Connelly's books show a love for Los Angeles and Southern California. So why did he move to Florida?
Taxes.
Taxes? That's it? Todd, give me more.
Well, he lives in LA now. He splits his time between both, but taxes.
And leading on to the next question, you talked about the $3 million Michael had to pay. How is he financially structurally rewarded on each episode?
Oh gosh, I don't have that precise information. I can tell you generally how these things work. So we'll just use some base numbers of how these things work. So Amazon or any other studio might say, okay, we want to option your book. And so you're going to get X amount of dollars up front. So we're going to say Michael Connelly got $1 million up front. And then if your TV show gets made, you get a bonus of another $1 million on the TV show being made. And then each and every episode, you're going to get X amount of dollars. Well, Michael is the executive producer of the show itself. So he's salary on top of everything else. And then he's also writing scripts. So he's doing fine. And then every single time Bosch airs on television, it's an advertisement for his backlist. So there's all sorts of different compensation, because I don't know what his ownership is of the TV show itself. So he might have a back end stake as well. Typically, the creator of a property might at base get 2% of the net profits. Amazon and Netflix don't tell you what their net profits are for their shows. Not like, and the regular networks are not great with revealing that information either, which is why, for instance, Connelly had to sue Paramount to find out exactly what he had to pay them to get his stuff back. So he's getting a perfectly fine amount. And then there's also union minimums to be a showrunner and to write individual scripts. And the minimums are quite high. And then he's Michael Connelly. He's the best-selling crime writer in the world, so he's not getting the minimum. So if you ever get asked to go to dinner with him, let him pick up the check. Unless the person asking owns Apple or something like that.
One of the questions we had through email was from Arnold. He said, how much control does the book author have over the series producer and writing staff interpretation of the story and characters in the series? I think you touched a bit in the beginning.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit. So Connolly's a different beast here because he's the executive producer of the show and writes some of the scripts. So for instance, in season 6, he wrote, let's see here. I know he wrote the last episode of season 6. He probably wrote 1 or 2 others. But as executive producer, you might do an executive producer pass also on a script. So it might say written by Todd and Ross, but we turn in our script and the EP goes through and does a draft on it, but they don't take credit. It's their job. So Connolly has a huge amount of say. I know he's not in there running the writer's room. That's what Eric Overmyer does. If he wanted to be the person in the room, he'd have all the say he wanted. Now, normally, they have nothing. Nothing at all. So in projects that I've been involved with in the past, when people have optioned my work, sometimes I don't get the script, in ever. You're often just lucky to be asked to come to a meeting. So it depends on the sway of the author themselves, how much they want to be involved, how little they want to be involved, if they're actually working on scripts. A good example of a lot of involvement, or not a lot of involvement initially, would be George R.R. Martin with Game of Thrones. But as Game of Thrones expanded and they started running out of books that were printed, I know they started leaning on George R.R. Martin more because they didn't know what was going to happen. And so he was coming in and meeting with those guys more often. But most of the time, the showrunners don't want guys like me in there.
Yeah, especially you, Todd.
No, especially me. They don't. You don't have any say. You sign it away for the money, basically.
Another question was, do you think one of the themes of season 6 is disappointment? The examples she provided was J. Edgar in himself and the bad cops, Bosch's disappointment in Daisy's mothers, and Irvine's disappointment in political in general.
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, disappointment is not a word that came to mind, but I absolutely agree with it. For me, what I kept seeing in season 6 in every single storyline was a character reckoning with an event in the past that was emotionally impacting them. So with Chief Irving, there's the tape. That was an event that he was involved with that impacted his political career. You've got J. Edgar and the murder squad from Haiti, and that they killed his father, and so now he's trying to solve that. We've got Bosch and the dead girl, the dead prostitute, and he's still trying to get away from. Every single person is reckoning some part of themselves, and disappointment, I think, is a byproduct of that. Is when you're unable to get the positive result that you're seeking, just like any of us, right? We always hope for the best in a situation, and we fear the worst, and that's drama.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like a cousin of disappointment was a big theme, and that cousin's regret. And it's not necessarily regret, a lasting regret. It's a regret that you realize you have, for the person that you were, for the things that you did that you thought were right that were wrong, or that when you acted out of hubris or something. And as a human being, I think regret is debilitating. Regret's one of those things you have to give up, right? Like if you go to therapy, or at some point, the person's going to say to you, you need to give up some of the things that you regret. And you're like, but that's what fuels my rage. Where will my rage be if I don't have my regrets?
Well, think about Crate and Barrel too, right? Like they were relegated off into having to work another department and a lesser department in their eyes. And it could be a regret in that they were to retire and this was their swan song, and they became better detectives. They're solving these know-nothing crimes. or lesser crimes in their eyes, but destroying at their jobs and helping everybody else in really huge ways. So you see the positive side of that too.
Yeah, I agree. Good question.
Why only 7 seasons if the show is number 1 on Amazon?
Yeah, I mean, they could go another 5, 6, 7 seasons, I think.
They could go forever if they wanted to. So there's a couple things that once you are aware of them is important to know. Go look at your favorite streaming services, Amazon, Netflix, Hulu. Go look and see how long your favorite show lasts. It lasts 3 seasons. Nothing on these streaming services lasts more than 3 or 4 seasons ever. Bosch is an outsider on that. So, I'm aware that also people wanted to move on and do other projects. So Connolly, for instance, the Lincoln Lawyer was set up at, I want to say it was CBS, and they had greenlit it. And then during the pandemic, they said, nah, we're going to ungreenlight Lincoln Lawyer. And so now he's trying to sell that elsewhere. And I know Eric Overmeyer and the other folks have other projects too. But 7 years or 7 seasons is 10 years of these people's lives, and I think they wanted to move on. And I think that, you don't want to get stale. And I think that the chance to get stale in a show like this is near constantly. You don't want to become like, what's a show that got bad in the 11th season? ER. Yeah, I think they were just ready to go. That being said, I guarantee you that there will be, every 2 years, there will be a Bosch Amazon movie. I guarantee it. A 2-hour straight to Amazon Bosch movie. Because there's too much money in it. The actors like doing it too much, but they don't want to have to work 6 months out of the year on the show.
I really hope for season 7 that they go the opposite direction with season 6 and they just make a laser focused, small, dark, simple story that they crush through 10 episodes of.
Well, they're only doing 8.
Beautiful. I think that to me sounds like that's what they're doing then.
Yeah.
Then you were talking about another department. What department did Crate and Barrel go to?
Caps. They called it caps. I have no idea. I'm that guy that if I read a word that I don't understand, I don't go to the dictionary to look it up. I try and figure it out through context. I never figured it out through context. So I'm sure, they were looking into a murder between 2 homeless guys, if memory serves. Yeah,
I think that they weren't homicide anymore. They were like assault and battery and something.
We should have looked up what is caps right after we looked up what is cesium.
Yeah, they weren't homicide anymore. They weren't murder cops anymore. They were doing something else. Yeah. If anyone knows, let us know.
The audience has spoken. They said crimes against persons.
Oh, thank you. You are going to be on the show with us the next time we do this. What else we got?
It's more of a comment. Francis says, I personally like to use a new van for each murder.
I'm sorry?
Francis said, I personally like to use a new van to each murder.
Well, that's nice, Francis. We also appreciate that you're helping out the economy by buying a new murder van for each of your victims. What about the person who has their hand raised? Did you get that person, Catherine?
Let me see. No, I don't see any Catherine.
Catherine has her hand raised. Catherine, if you're still... Oh, now her hand is gone. Catherine, if you still have a question, just type it in there in the bottom. So she's raised her hand again. So Ross, you've never actually read any Michael Connolly books, though, have you?
No, I don't think so.
Wow. How have you gone this far in your life? Like as a man?
I haven't. Where should I? Okay, great. Where do I start?
Well, I would start with Angel's Flight. That's my favorite one, and that's based. There was a season that was based on Angel's Flight. Season 2, I think, was based on Angel's Flight. It's a really good one. It's very LA. It's a good crime, solid murder. All right, more hands are raised. What do you got there, Nancy? You're muted.
Do either one of you know the inside information about the restart of filming since the halt in March? Have any production companies started filming again?
No, not in America. There's some stuff filming overseas. Here's when you'll know that they will start filming again, when the trade unions have a safety plan in place. And until the grips have a safety plan, in place, nothing's going to happen. And so when they were talking about getting started in July and the unions had not yet released a safety plan for the, for the below the line workers, that's how you knew that they weren't actually going to start getting back to work. So all the folks that I know, writing TV, acting in TV and films, and then also working on the back end, they don't believe they'll be getting back to work until September. So get used to game shows. I am slightly concerned that we're going to run out of things to watch and people have to read. Where will I ever find any books? All right, any other questions, Nancy? Anyone else have stuff for us?
Not related to the show. Someone did ask where we can find this rerun.
The rerun of what?
Of this episode.
Oh, I'm sure that you'll get an email in our newsletter that shows a link to our YouTube page where all this stuff is happily stored. Well, Ross, thank you so much for staying up late in Baltimore in the middle of packing to move. If there's anyone watching this who lives in Baltimore other than his dad, who's in the next room,
next door,
who's just right over there, his sister Gina, Ross will be needing someone to help unpack the house, take care of the kid on the 30th. Just email me directly. I'll put you guys in contact with him. Ross, thank you so much for coming and doing this. It was a blast. Everyone, thank you so much for coming and watching us. The next show we're going to do is Little Fires Everywhere, which is a fantastic book, and it is a show that is on Hulu. Hulu, by the way, was a streaming service I did not have prior to the pandemic. I've been watching Seinfeld every night, like 30 hours a night. I wake up in the morning and I'm full George Costanza. Like I needed any help with that. But it's on Hulu. You can watch it there. So I hope you enjoyed yourselves. And we'll see you in August. Take care, everybody.